Okay. Alright, the book starts off with Merlin's riddle. When dragons flew in days of old, with valor in their wings, one fell prey to evil's song, and learned what Satan sings. Goliath, stained with Satan's words, made other dragons flee. For songs like leaven spread decay, corrupting souls born free. Now Satan's scales coat dragon lore, he hides between the lines. He sings foul words and books corrupt, and dances on their spines. Are dragons vile? Are dragons tame? Depends on who you ask. Do scales hide tricks of Satan when he dons a fearful mask? One man brought sin into the world, one dragon brought all shame. One man redeemed his fallen race, will dragons find the same? Yet dragons dwell in hearts of men, from God and some from balls, and some sing words with angels' wings, while most chant Satan's scales. God deems what men cannot, forgives whate'er thou dost. Who else can save the men of earth, with dragons in our midst? Alright, and that was Merlin's riddle at the beginning of the book. Alright. This is chapter 1. Halt, foul dragon. Billy stared at the tall stranger, a ghostly figure draped in dark chainmail. He appeared to be a knight of some kind, like a toy box action figure come to life. But what was he so mad about? Why was he yelling? The knight swung a sword. Its brilliant blade flashed in the sun, and his armor jingled across his body, echoing... just a second, I'm going to move my keyboard here. Okay. The knight swung a sword. Its brilliant blade flashed in the sun, and his armor jingled across his body, echoing his swift, skillful moves. With a wave of his shield, he barked a challenge. I fear you not, fiend, nor your hellish fire. Come to battle, and we shall see whom the Creator will protect. Billy opened his mouth to answer, but his throat burned, raw and sizzling, and acid bubbled up from his boiling stomach. With a convulsive shudder, he belched a plume of hot, steamy gases, blistering his tongue and scorching his lips. A second later, a raging fire blasted through his gaping mouth and hurled towards the knight. He jerked his shield up and tucked his body behind its protective armor. The flaming torrent splashed around the shield's edges, tearing the sword from his hand and enveloping his sleeve. He flapped his blazing arm. Cursed lizard! Billy clamped a hand over his mouth and sucked cool air between his fingers to soothe his swollen tongue. Where did that fire come from? And does this knight think that I'm a dragon? Billy looked at his hands. They were normal, no scales or claws, but something was different. A ring glittered on his right index finger. Somehow, it looked familiar. In the ring's center, a dark stone stared at him like a bloody luminescent eye, the prophetic eye of a mysterious old man. The prophetic eye of a mysterious old man peering at him from a deep cauldron of swirling scarlet. The cyclonic vision drew Billy closer and closer, and his mind swam in a dizzying whirlpool. The stone reflected everything, even his worried face. As the eye's red glow deepened, Billy's features morphed. His ears grew long and pointed, and his mouth stretched out, wide and toothy. Within seconds, the transformation was complete. I am a dragon. The knight appeared again from behind the shield, holding his bare arm away from his body. His sleeve had been scorched to ashes. An angry, reddish-brown welt on his forearm oozed with curling strings of smoke. Of course you're a dragon, he bellowed. Do you think me a fool? He raised his sword again. This time it cast a laser-like beam through its point, shooting high into the sky. The knight tightened his jaw and renewed his strength. I still fear you not, neither your fire from hell nor your demon wings. Wings? Did he say wings? Billy twisted his neck and looked at his back. Wings. He tried flapping them. They worked. As he flapped harder, his body lifted from the ground. 10 feet, 20 feet. Below, the shrinking knight waved his sword, but his shouts grew garbled, and his words scattered in the wind, becoming a ringing sound, more like an alarm clock than a bellowing knight. As he flew higher and higher, light melted away, leaving floating through calm blackness. The air thinned to a bitter, cold vacuum. His wings collapsed and shrank to the size of butterfly wings. He dropped through the vacuum, flailing his arms, desperately trying to grab something, anything, to stop his fall. He tried to scream, but his voice died in the hollow void. At any second, he would crash into trees or rocks below, breaking every bone in his body. He closed his eyes. He was falling. Billy shot to a sitting position. As he tried to read the dim surroundings, he panted, his tongue dry. Instead of coldness and a falling sensation, softness supported his body underneath, and warmth covered his legs. On a night table at his side, an alarm clock rang, the remnants of the night's wind-shattered shouts. With a quick slap, he shut off the alarm and exhaled. It was just a dream. Still, it felt so real. He rubbed his palms against his sweat-dampened cheeks. No scales. But what about wings? Unable to see his back, he jumped to his feet and tiptoed towards the light switch, dodging half-finished pencil sketches that lay on the floor. With an upward swipe, he slapped the light on. Light flooded the room. Billy blinked at the 2 bulbs in the ceiling fixture. With a series of one-footed hops, he maneuvered through his art-strewn room and headed for his mirror, almost afraid to look as he turned his back. A sweaty pajama top clung to his shoulders, wrinkled, wet, and flat against his skin. He breathed a sigh of relief. No wings. He smacked his hot, dry lips. Felt like he had fried that night and eaten him for breakfast. How could a dream blend into reality like that? Probably from too much pepperoni on the pizza last night. After he gathered his school clothes and tucking them under his arm, he shuffled down the hall to the bathroom, thinking about the quickly fading dream. Was he really a dragon? Was that man a knight? He flicked the light on and found the mouthwash on the bathroom countertop. He grabbed the green plastic bottle and read the writing on the side. Makes your breath sparkling clean and cool. It was worth a try. After gargling the tangy stuff several times, he smacked his lips again. His mouth still felt like he used charcoal. He slapped the plastic bottle on the countertop. Nothing helped. As he straightened his body, he examined the hair on his arms. It seemed thicker and more reddish than ever, even though there wasn't a hint of red in the brown follicles on his head, just a flattened, ragtag mat of unruly strands that needed a dose of discipline. He brushed his hair with a quick sweep of his fingers. His thick, short nap perked straight up, then wilted to one side. Studying his reflection, he leaned forwards until he could see the individual pores in his skin. With his mouth open wide, he breathed on his image, straining his eyes to catch any results. The mirror stayed clear, no fog. 3rd day in a row. He drew back and blew softly on his knuckles. Ouch! He shook his hand and doused it in cold water from the faucet. A red blister appeared under the water spray. He grimaced. His breath never been this bad before. Was it finally time to tell his mom and dad about the problem? Would they make him wear a surgical mask to keep everyone safe? Some of the kids at school already called him Dragon Breath. He didn't want a new name, like Lizard Lips, or something even worse. Maybe it was a fungus or an alien life form that took up residence in his cheeks to create a new civilization. He ran his tongue along the roof of his mouth. It felt like glazed pottery, a series of slick ridges that failed to register his tongue's touch. Aliens that live off saliva? Stranger things had happened, though he couldn't remember when. William, his mom called from downstairs. Hurry up, the bus will be here soon. He sighed and put on his clothes, starting with his favorite cargo pants, the light brown ones with deep pockets on the sides of the lower legs. The right-hand pocket still held 2 pens and a mechanical pencil, all tightly clipped to the opening. After throwing on a shirt and quickly tying his gym shoes, he headed towards the stairs, pausing for a minute to pet Gandalf. The long-haired cat yawned and arched his back to fully take in Billy's deep strokes. I'd guess you'd never call me Dragon Breath, would you? After rubbing the purring cat one more time, he bounded down the stairs, jackhammering every second stair on the way down. When he reached bottom, he stopped and listened. Mom was humming. That meant something good was cooking. As he followed the sweet sound, his nose picked up the delicious smells of morning, fried bacon and fresh coffee. His mom perked up, prompting him to whistle along with his mother's song, a tune he had heard recently in a movie. A song about remembering the past, though he couldn't recall the title. As soon as he walked into the kitchen, Mom turned towards him and extended a foil pouch and a tall glass of orange juice. Your father's having bacon and eggs, but I didn't know if you'd be up on time, so I didn't make you any. Billy grimaced at the silver pouch. Pop-Tarts again? No complaints. The early bird gets the hot breakfast. You're the one who decided to stay up late. Billy took the pouch and glass, his eye level even with hers. Since his recent growth spurt, her 5'7" frame matched, giving him confidence to playfully spar with her from time to time. I'm a night owl, not an early bird. You're the bird you set your mind to be. Now excuse me while I finish up. It's my turn to be the clean the kitchen bird. Smiling, she ran a hand through her hair, intentionally mussing her light brown locks, then did the same to Billy. Don't ruffle my feathers, and I won't ruffle yours. Don't mess with the mama bird. Got it. Billy turned towards the breakfast table. Dad leaned back in his chair, munching a slice of toast. If he was a bird, he would definitely be an eagle, though not a bald eagle, not with so much reddish-brown hair on his head, and the backs that gripped his newspaper. It seemed that he could grow a beard in just weeks, though he stayed clean-shaven most of the time, including this morning. Billy shook himself out of his trance. Mom, can I help you with the dishes or something? Nope, I got it covered. She set a frying pan in the sink, squirted a stream of soap into the pan, and turned on the faucet. So, Night Owl, what kept you up so late? Were you working on the poster for the festival? No. I wanted to finish that portrait for Dad's friend. The one of the basset hound? Dr. Franklin's dog? Yeah, I left it on Dad's. I have it right here. Dad said, holding up a large sheet of paper. You did a great job. It looks just like Maggie. Billy stepped over the table and sat, placing his glass of juice next to his elbow. Thanks, he said, reaching for his dad's cup of coffee. With his fingers wrapped around the warm mug, he waited, displaying a big smile and a, may I please have a sip? Look, Dad glared at him, his thick eyebrows curling downward, but the gleam in his brown eyes gave away his placating. Billy took a long slurp and watched over the edge of the cup, while Dad had a smirk, pretended to be interested again in the drawing. Billy set the cup down, after a satisfied ah, and wiped his mouth with his father's napkin. Dr. Franklin's photo of Maggie was small, Billy said, pointing at the newspaper, so I blew her up on my easel. Old Doc will love it. How do you want to be paid this time? Just tell him to send a check to the Humane Society and to put my name on the memo line. They'll know what to do with it. Now you're including your name? What are they doing, constructing the Billy Bannister wing for stray cats? Well, they are expanding. Gandalf's buddies need a better place to live, you know. Yes, I remember when you chose Gandalf. Those cat cages were stacked higher than my head. So they all need so they need all the help they can get. True. But don't you want to keep some of the money for yourself? Not really. I should get plenty at the festival tomorrow night. Billy smiled and stared at the coffee cup. Maybe I'll get enough to buy my own coffee maker. Dad peeked around the drawing and casually tipped the cup forward to get a look at the penny-sized splotch of coffee remaining at the bottom. How much should I tell him to spend? I don't know. Billy shrugged. $20? This might be your best work yet. Dad rolled the portrait into a tube, set it between the salt and pepper shakers, and picked up his newspaper. I'll ask for 50. That shouldn't be a problem for Doc. Cool. 50 would be great. Right. Gandalf's friends might want to buy you a coffee maker for Christmas. Dad grinned and whacked Billy on the head with his newspaper. Billy tried to grab it, but Dad snatched it out of the way just in time. Billy lunged, wrapped his arms around Dad's neck, and pulled him to the floor. A World Wrestling Championship match had commenced right there in the Bannister's kitchen, but it wasn't very convincing, with both parties laughing so hard. Billy rose and gave his father a helping hand off the floor. Better keep working out. One of these days I'll pin you. Dad laughed. Not a chance. Billy, Mom called from the foyer. I heard a motor. The bus might be here. Kind of early, though. Billy guzzled the rest of his juice, set the glass on the table, and walked backwards to the door as he spoke. Dad, will you be able to help me at the festival booth tomorrow? I have to change the flight schedule, but it shouldn't be a problem. Great. Billy hurried to the foyer, grabbed his backpack from the floor, and gave Mom a quick peck on the cheek. She winced and rubbed her face, then quickly recovered and waved as he rushed to the door. Billy continued in a fast trot, glancing back. Billy continued in a fast trot, glancing back. Mom felt his superheated breath. He had been careful to keep his mouth safely away from Dad while wrestling, but his slip-up probably revealed his secret. Billy looked down Cordell Road, the two-lane street in front of the house, but the bus wasn't in sight, only a dark blue Cadillac idling at the corner about 100 feet away. Strange. Had he already missed the bus? He hustled across the street to stop and searched the other end of the Cordell. No bus that way either. The Cadillac began rolling slowly his way. Billy stiffened. Did this guy mean trouble? Maybe he was just lost. Trying to catch a glimpse of the driver, Billy squinted, but the rising sun painted a glare on the windshield. A heavy uneasiness churned in his stomach, like a feeling of impending doom. He had to get away from this guy. Billy snapped his fingers, pretending he had forgotten something, and turned towards the road. As he stepped off the curb, the Cadillac gunned its engine. Billy jumped back. The car launched forwards with its tire-biting screech. At that moment, the bus came around the distant bend in the road. The Cadillac screeched again, this time stopping within 10 feet of Billy. The driver's door popped open. A short, stocky figure stepped out. Billy accelerated to a quick march in the direction of the school, hoping the bus would come pick him up further down the road. Bannister, the driver shouted. Stop! Billy broke into a jog. He knows my name, but I don't know him. Just keep going. When the bus pulled up by his side and stopped, Billy halted. Bannister! Billy pivoted. The Cadillac driver was now running in his direction. When the bus door swung open, Billy hopped to the steps, feeling the hair on his neck, sending a shot of tingles down his back. He waved at the driver. Mr. Horner, close the doors, quick. Mr. Horner pulled a lever, and the door's two panels swung together. Billy looked out the vertical windows. The Cadillac driver stood on the sidewalk, with his hands on his hips, staring at the bus. Billy tried to read his expression. Was he angry? Disappointed? As the bus pulled away, Billy turned to the driver and gave him a questioning look, wondering if he had noticed the man. Mr. Horner had never been much for words, but he communicated his thoughts with a masterful collection of at least 1,000 prune-faced frowns, one for every negative human emotion imaginable. Today's frown said, "Hurry up, Bannister. I spilled hot coffee on my pants and I'm in no mood to watch you dwaddle." Billy sighed and looked down the bus's long center aisle. Out of the back window, the Cadillac driver's figure shrank as he walked back to his car. The quaking sensation in Billy's stomach spread into his limbs, making him shake all over. Who was that guy? What did he want with me? As he stepped towards the seats, images from the weird dream again haunted his thoughts, along with his mom's pained expression after he kissed her cheek. He felt pursued by phantoms, a swarming host of invisible fears. Now a physical stalker lurked close to home, bold and real. Billy shivered and pulled his backpack up higher. I feel like a hunted animal, but who's the hunter? Alright, Chapter 2. I'm gonna go get myself some tea here. Chapter 2. The Bathroom Incident. Billy searched the sea of faces for Walter, his best friend. After a few seconds, his unmistakable food-stained baseball cap rose above other heads. Billy stepped over a kid's outstretched leg and called, "Hey, Walter!" Walter spun towards the front, his brow wrinkled. "Hi, Billy." Still standing, Billy leaned towards over to get another glimpse through the back window. The Cadillac was out of sight. What were you looking at? A car. I saw it cruising around our neighborhood this morning. Do you know this guy? Billy sat in the aisle seat that Walter had saved for him. I don't think so. Do you? Never seen him before today. Walter's probing blue eyes stared at Billy from under the brim of his cap, his bushy eyebrows turning down toward his slightly crooked nose. He came by my house, told my dad he was a reporter doing a story on people in the neighborhood. He started asking personal questions about your family, so my dad told him to get lost. About my family? Like what? Like where your dad came from before he lived in Castlewood. Billy set his backpack on the floor in the front of the seat. Dad won't even tell me that one. And none of the pictures in the photo album go back before I was born. So I just stopped asking. Well, my dad said he'd call your dad, so I guess they'll figure out what's going on. Billy tore open his Pop-Tart and blew on the corner before he bit into it. As he repeated the blowing and biting routine, Walter stared at him with narrowed eyes. What are you doing? Blowing on it to heat it up. What? 1.5 degrees? Billy tried to hide a smile as he took another bite. You'd be surprised. Let's see. Does that? Okay, it only interferes with the camera if I hold it up too high, so I think I should be fine just holding it up here. Whatever. But if you hate being called Dragon Breath, you'd better stop doing stuff like that. He looked out the window at the passing scenery, then back at Billy. You want to go to Hardin's Pass again this weekend? Last time the fish bit better than the mosquitoes for a change. Billy took another bite and finished chewing before he replied, intentionally staring straight ahead. Sure, why not? Walter shoved Billy's shoulder. What's with you today? You're acting like I'm a leper. Do I have bad breath or something? Billy grinned, but kept his face forward. Not you, buddy. Do you want to smell mine? Walter crossed his two index fingers and pushed them towards Billy's nose. Back, foul vampire. It's a wooden stake for you if you get any closer. Billy pushed Walter's fingers down. Halloween's over, and Thanksgiving's coming. Don't be a turkey. Well, you know how I like to gobble. Yeah, I know. Like what you did at the Boy Scout picnic. You mean the hamburger incident? Walter asked. That's what you call it, but I call it the hot dog, hamburger, baked beans, coleslaw, potato chip incident. Well, yeah, I guess that describes it. I still don't see what the big deal was. Billy eyed the three other bus riders listening in. He pulled the bill of Walter's cup down and pumped up his vocal volume. All that stuff on one hamburger bun, and then you left it on Mrs. Rogers' seat just before she tried to sit there. She jumped up and screamed so loud, 6 people called 911. Then Dr. Franklin's Bassett started licking it off her dress, and she screamed even louder. To this day, Mrs. Roberts will hardly sit anywhere but in her own chair, and she always looks down before she sits. A hail of derisive laughter pelted their ears, but Walter just shrugged it off. I didn't even leave it there on purpose. After a few quiet seconds, he looked at Billy's backpack. So, you got another Pop-Tart on you? Billy shook his head. With your appetite, I don't see how you keep from getting a lard belly. But don't worry, there will be plenty to eat at the festival tomorrow night. Yeah, but I'm running the Boy Scouts drinking booth, so I have to count on good friends to bring me stuff. Walter nudged Billy's ribs. Are you going to the festival, good friend? Yeah, I'm doing the caricature booth. Caricature? Is that like one of your animal drawings? No, it's a sketch of a person's face, except that I exaggerate. If a guy has a big nose, I draw it the size of a baseball, and I make big ears look like Dumbo ears. And people like stuff that makes them look weird. You'd be surprised, but I also draw their pets. I usually get big tips for those. Walter rubbed his thumb over the tips of his fingers. So, you make a lot of money? Quite a bit, actually. But I send it to the Humane Society. I keep just enough to buy my pens and pencils and stuff. I'll bet the dunking booth's more fun. Did you hear that our very own history teacher volunteered to take the plunge? Billy snickered. Mr. Hamilton getting dunked? Are you kidding? Nope. And said it's for a good cause. Walter mimicked Mr. Hamilton's voice, a resonant tone with a dignified British accent. Scouting is a fine way to make gentlemen out of the young males in our town. Billy grinned. Walter's impersonation was perfect, filled with hysterical exaggeration. As Walter continued mimicking their teacher, he mussed his hair and widened his eyes. You have to go to the water closet? Did you forget to go before you left home? Did you have a bit too much tea this morning? Stop, Billy cried, holding his sides as he laughed. I like Mr. Hamilton, stop. Walter finished with another British-soaked quip. Whatever you say, Mr. Bannister. After catching his breath, Billy wiped a tear from his eye. Although the humor had temporarily pushed his problems aside, when his hand paused in front of his mouth, his breath's intense heat resurrected the mysteries. He turned towards the front and stared at the road ahead. The droning of the bus engine and familiar buzzing of student chit-chat created a silencing backdrop. For the rest of the trip, Walter gazed at the mountains while Billy pondered his atomic-powered breath. His mother's painful wince provided that the problem had grown beyond his ability to conceal it. He had to do something, but what? When they arrived at school, Billy and Walter shuffled down the bus exit stairs with the rest of the troop. With 20 minutes to spare before the first period, they followed their Thursday routine, each buying a root beer from an outdoor vending machine in preparation for going to the cafeteria to exchange belches and impossible stories with other guys. Billy paused on the sidewalk, his unopened can of root beer in hand, as he started at the school. Inside, another day of hiding his breath awaited along with new worries about mysterious Cadillac and its about the mysterious Cadillac and its driver. "Aren't you coming?" Walter asked. "Go on ahead. I have to do something." "You sure?" Billy nodded. "I'm sure." Just a sec. I'm gonna drink some of my tea. Oops. I still have the "be right back" text on. Turn that off.
탕수육.
On. "Suit yourself," Walter said as he walked backwards towards the school. "But you'll miss a good one." "Frank's going to tell you about the time he went on safari and wrestled a lion. And you have one to top it, right?" Walter grinned. "Yeah, I have a lion story too." "Oh no," Billy said, wincing. Not the one about you getting killed and eaten at the zoo." Walter turned toward the school. "I've got the teeth marks to prove it," he called as he hurried away. Billy shook his head. A morning of trading tall tales sounded great, and he had the perfect opening line about swallowing a blowtorch that still worked down in his stomach, but it would have been too real. The others didn't usually bring props, and his breath would have raised too many questions. He crossed the street and climbed the grassy hill, leading forward to plant each foot while struggling against the steep incline. After reaching the top, he sat on a knee-high stone and pulled a small spiral-bound notebook from his pant leg pocket, along with a mechanical pencil. Knowing about his talents, the art teacher had asked him to make a poster of the campus, something funny to attract people to the school's fundraising booth at the festival. He already made 2 drawings that now hung in the hallways, but this one had to be his best work yet. Now was a good time to make a quick sketch, something he could transfer to the poster board later. The entire campus lay before him in a mosaic of bricks, pavement, and teeming students. The complex seemed small for the number of students it handled. In one neighborhood block, they squeezed in a parking lot, a ball field, and a basketball court. Most of the kids called it a dump, but it didn't look so bad. From this vantage point, the mountains behind the school framed the campus perfectly. The colorful background of dazzling autumn leaves faded in the last few weeks, but the scene still resembled a landscape photograph in a travel magazine. West Virginia had its drawbacks, but the mountains weren't one of them. After taking a long drink from his root beer can, he watched his peers mill around the schoolyard, most covered by dim shadows cast by buildings that blocked the brightening sky. With a firm grip on his pencil, he let his imagination take control. He sketched the students as tiny escapees, running from the graphite shadows created by the school's building caricature, an upside-down monster, a burrowing beast that had drilled its head and upper body into the ground. The school's narrow bell towers on each side served as the monster's legs, and 3 sets of double doors in the middle of the first floor became a gaping hole in the giant's huge stomach. Underground, its eyes shone like red beacons, sinister and beady. The monster smiled as its doors closed to imprison the hundreds of children it had sucked into its hungry belly. Billy held the sketch at arm's length. He looked it over. The echoes of distant laughter quieted, and the autumn breeze whistled past his ears. He lowered the page. The schoolyard was empty. He was late. He dropped the notebook and pencil back into his leg pocket and rose. Just as he set his feet to jog down the slope, a car turned into the school's access road. The dark blue Cadillac that had stalked him earlier. Billy crouched low. Late or not, this wasn't a good time to have a chat with a stalking stranger. When the Cadillac passed the schoolyard and turned the next corner, he hurried down the grassy slope, his shoes sliding as he scuffed the hillside. After crossing the street, he hustled up the concrete entrance stairs, skipping as many steps as he could. "Hey, Dragon Breath!" Billy halted at the halfway point and turned. Adam Lark stood at ground level with his clinging cohorts. "How many girls' lips are you gonna shrivel today?" While Adam and his pals laughed, Billy rolled a hand into a fist. That new nickname had never stung this badly before. It had started innocently in the science lab. When Bunsen burner wouldn't work, he blew on his test tube to heat it, but someone noticed. One whisper led to another, and the incident grew into school-wide joke. "Billy Bannister thinks he's a dragon." Adam and company moved on, still throwing verbal jabs. As they walked away, Billy continued up the steps, ran through the doorway, and jogged down the hall, stopping for a drink at the water fountain before continuing to room 107. When he swung the door open, 30 young teenagers, already seated with their books open and pens in hand, turned towards him, as if guided by remote control. Mr. Hamilton called from the front of the classroom, his unmistakable British accent as pronounced as ever. "Students, unless you think the next exam will be about Mr. Bannister's clothing choices, I suggest you focus your attention on your lecture." His words held sway over the studious automatons, and their heads swiveled toward the front again. He took a step toward the door, tapping his marker board pointer on his palm. "Mr. Bannister, I never thought I would see you join the ranks of the toddy." The perfectly lubricated rubric drilled through Billy's ear, like a broken pencil grinding in a sharpener. "Would you care to explain to us why you're late?" Billy's warmth radiated through Billy's cheeks. At first, an hour of detention seemed to be in the offing, but a gleam in the teacher's eye said otherwise. Billy straightened. "I'd rather not explain if you don't mind." Mr. Hamilton pointed down the aisle. "Very well, take your seat." He turned to the rest of the class. "Now, as I was saying, open your book to page 119. We will begin our study with the legend of Arthur." Mr. Hamilton paused while the pages turned. With his tall, lanky form opened the large textbook, he looked like a stereotypical country preacher, his deeply set eyes staring with complete awe and reverence at the words before him. His thick mane of gray hair shifted, and it fell over his ears as he read. Stone, as signaling that he was a rightful king. One legend identifies the sword as the famed Excalibur, though most authorities claim it was the sword of Britain that Merlin sentenced the stone. Excalibur, according to the myth, was a gift from the Lady of the Lake, a goddess-like nymph who appeared in mysterious pools. Such is the character of legend. Who knows what is really true? The most popular legends. Oh, is someone there? Ah! Okay. Mr. Hamilton continued his lecture, reading pieces of the text and giving his own views. He explained why he found this pseudo-history important. Some of it was undeniably true. although other parts remained highly doubtful. One of the keys of wisdom, he said, lies in separating truth from myth, and your ability to discern reality from fantasy will make you kings in this world of knaves and separate you from the foolish believers of myth. Billy looked at Walter as he stared with eyes, wide eyes, spellbound. Mr. Hamilton's words had apparently transported him to another land and another time. Billy followed the stare to the marker board, where a glass-covered frame rested on the ledge and leaned against the board. Under the glass lay a painting of a shield with a beautiful coat of arms emblazoned on the front. The design held a knight's full helmet, silver coat with gold trim, and an ornate crown on top. Under that was a red breastplate, decorated with 3 white clovers. Coming out from behind the armor were long red and white sleeves, with 3 pointed ends that seemed to be trying to wrap themselves around the breastplate like snakes strangling a victim. Billy tore his gaze away from the shield and turned to listen to Mr. Hamilton. As he spoke, his passion for the subject rang with a sermon-like ardor. His face rose and fell with each mystical legend, his wild gray hair shaking with every movement of his aged head. Billy could almost see images of Lancelot and Gawain in his teacher's eyes. Not only the excitement of the sword-to-sword tourney, but also the nobility and valor of a knight. Yet, soon the coffee, orange juice, root beer, and water worked their way into Billy's bladder, causing more than a pinch. He raised his hand and waved it. "Mr. Hamilton?" The teacher just reached a crescendo in his story, and he stopped mid-sentence, his arms raised to demonstrate a swordplay technique. "Yes, Mr. Bannister, what is your question?" I have to go to the bathroom." Mr. Hamilton lowered his arms in a brief sigh and stepped towards Billy. "You have to go to the water closet?" The friendly gleam reappeared in his eye. "It's only first period. Did you forget to go before you left your home, or did you have a bit too much tea this morning?" A wave of Snickers passed through the room, and Walter's face turned a shade of purple as he choked a belly laugh. No," Billy said, suppressing a laugh of his own. "I didn't forget. I did drink a lot, though." Mr. Hamilton took another step closer to Billy and studied his face. "Are you sick? Your face is turning red." Billy swallowed. "I don't think so." Mr. Hamilton marched back to his desk. After scratching down a signature, he tore a piece of paper from a pad and extended it. "Here's your pass. Hurry back." Billy grabbed the paper, hustled through the doorway, and let out a laugh as he had stifled as he let out the laugh he had stifled as he walked down the hall. When he arrived at the restroom, he hurried inside and secluded himself in a stall. After he used the toilet and flushed it, a scratching sound entered the room. He peered through the gap near the stall's door jamb. Adam had entered, dragging a short stepladder, the kind librarians use to reach a book. He set the stepladder down 2 feet in front of the sinks, climbed to the top, and stretched his long arms towards the ceiling. When he saw Billy, he gasped and blew a relieved sigh. "Oh, it's just you, Dragon Breath." Billy left the stall and looked at Adam, standing on tiptoes. Adam flicked on a cigarette lighter and moved the flame close to the alarm's heat sensor, installed next to a sprinkler on the ceiling. Billy set his foot on the ladder's bottom step. "What are you doing?" "None of your business, and you'll keep quiet about it if you know it's good for you. You'll set off the alarm." "Yeah, genius, that's the point." Billy tried to clamber up the stool, but the thin metal legs squeaked and jerked under the shifting weight. "Stop it!" Adam held the lighter poised to the sensor, trying to hold it steady while he used the other hand to push Billy's forehead. "Get off!" With a tug on Adam's shirt, Billy hoisted himself to the top, unable to push past Adam's flailing arm. Billy craned his neck and blew at the lighter. Whoosh! The sprinklers spewed on their faces with streams of putrid water. Alarms blared, sounding like a swarm of screaming bats. Adam slid the lighter into Billy's hand and jumped off the stool just as Mr. Hamilton stepped into the bathroom. Billy scrambled down, but too late. Mr. Hamilton had seen him. Billy stared at his open palm, the scream still showering his head. Drops of water fell from his drenched hand, creating a shallow puddle under the crime scene evidence, a silver lighter with a bronze-coiled snake emblem on the front. "Well, well, Mr. Lark, Mr. Bannister," the teacher said as he stood at the door, just out of the smell of spray. "I thought Mr. Bannister might be ill, so I came to check on his condition. Now I see you have filled the water closet with water." Adam pointed at Billy. "It wasn't me, Mr. Hamilton. I came in here and Billy was standing on the stool with the lighter. I tried to stop him." Mr. Hamilton shook his head. "Come now, Adam. If I know you, you were cheering him on." He opened the restroom door and gestured toward the hall. "We'll let the principal sort this out." Just as Billy and Adam stepped toward the hall, Mr. Hamilton barred the door with his arm. The corridor had filled with a disorganized mass of students, some sauntering with sleepy, bored expressions as they slowly migrated towards the exit door. Mr. Hamilton called out, "It's a false alarm. We must, however, continue to guide the students to the proper exits." He waved at a teacher. "Mr. Johnson, please check one on room 107. My students are likely following routine drill protocol, but propriety demands a responsible guide. I must stay here until all is clear. Please also advise Mr. Tompkins that I will arrive late for study hall, should our delay extend into next period. He can supervise the students without me." He turned to Billy and Adam. "I'm sure Dr. Whitmer will deal with you severely, so I'll not subject you to further embarrassment. You may stand here until the halls have emptied." The fire department arrived and conducted their obligatory check. The sticky, smelly water clung to Billy's shoulders and back, making the wait seem interminable? Interesting. Yeah, interminable. A bell signaled the end of class, and the minutes dragged into second period. After the students returned and scattered to their classrooms, Mr. Hamilton allowed Billy and Adam to start their march down the hall. All was quiet now, and the corridor seemed much larger than usual. Billy followed his teacher toward the principal's office. His shoes squeaked, and he left a trail of pancake-sized puddles in his wake. Hadn't he seen this in a movie? He was a condemned prisoner, tramping down the final corridor towards the electric chair. With so much evidence against him, it would do him no good to claim innocence. He was doomed. Is it? Yeah, I guess it's going. Okay. He threw glances at Adam from time to time, trying to gauge his reaction. Although covered with streaming water, Adam's face seemed to be made of stone. He stared straight ahead and kept his mouth in a tight line, probably accustomed to this march. It was a wonder that he hadn't been expelled by now. Billy walked on, staring at the large door at the far end of the hall, the door to the principal's office. Rumors about the new principal abounded. Eccentric old guy, one friend had said. Really weird, another claimed. These opinions would soon be exposed as either truth or lies. Mr. Hamilton shooed Billy and Adam through the door and past a girl sitting in a chair in the anteroom. Wearing a backpack, she stared at them. When Billy met her gaze, she smiled, but said nothing. His cheeks warming, he broke the stare and looked straight ahead as Mr. Hamilton guided him into the interior office. Two miscreants for your judgment, Mr. Whitmer. They were the ones who set off the fire alarm. The restroom next to the north entrance is flooded. When I walked in, Mr. Bannister stood under the sprinkler, but I suspect both of them were involved. It wasn't my fault, Billy and Adam shouted at the same time. Adam continued, thrusting a finger towards Billy. He did it. I tried to stop him. Billy's throat clenched shut. What should he say? He probably was the one who set off the sprinklers. Adam went on. Ask Mr. Hamilton. Billy had the quiet. Mr. Hamilton turned back to the principal, regained his formal attitude. I will be leaving you with these two, Miss Dr. Whitmer. The principal nodded. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I was wondering who caused all the commotion. Mr. Hamilton nodded in return and closed the door behind him, leaving Billy and Adam alone in the strange office. Billy stared at the room's decor. Broadswords, shields, and coats of arms hung from the walls in glass cases. The collection resembled museum pieces from the Dark Ages. One display held an assortment of thumbscrews. Had they squashed the thumbs of misbehaving boys who had the misfortune of running into hard-hearted principal? Now the rumors made sense. In fact, compared to reality, they underestimated the case. This man wasn't eccentric, he was dangerous. Alrighty, Chapter 3. Dr. Whittier glared at the boys, his yellow-green eyes shining like a cat's. Well now, suppose you two tell me what's going on. Adam coolly rattled off his story. Mr. Albertson gave me a hall pass to use the restroom. As soon as I went in, I saw Billy on a stool holding a lighter up to the sensor thing. I tried to stop him, but as soon as I got close, the sprinklers came on. That's how I got wet. Adam pointed at Billy. Look, he's still holding the lighter he used to set it off. The principal's graying eyebrows bent toward the middle of his forehead. Is this true, Mr. Bannister? Is that your lighter? Billy held the lighter in his open palm. I do have the lighter, but that's because he shoved it into my hand when the sprinklers went off. It's really his, not mine. Adam kept his eyes on the principal and maintained his composure. Dr. Whittier, he said, still pointing, I never seen that lighter before in my life. Remember, you took my lighter last week, and I haven't smoked a cigarette since, just like I promised. Billy scowled at Adam. How could he lie without any hint of guilt? The principal shook his head and ran his fingers through his gray hair, cut like a closely cropped horse's mane, thick and bristly. I've heard about your promises, Mr. Lark. They're not exactly from the lips of God. He reached towards Billy. Let me see that lighter, young man. Billy handed it to him. While Dr. Whittier examined it, someone knocked on the door. Come in, he said. The door opened slowly, and a pair of bright blue eyes peered in. Dr. Whittier? The principal's expression softened. Even the shimmering in his eyes seemed to dim. Oh, Bonnie, I'm sorry I kept you waiting. The fire alarm made me forget. He extended his hand. Here, I'll send you a note. The girl from the anteroom, how do you say that? Anteroom, stepped up to the desk and renewed her stare at Billy, while Dr. Whittier pulled out a pen. Billy fidgeted, trying to avoid her stare, though he cast a furtive glance or two her way. She had to be the new girl from Montana, Bonnie Silver. She seemed nice, but why the stares? These two rascals came in just after you did, Dr. Whittier said, sliding the lighter to the side. I'm sorry sorry they interrupted us. He studied the absence excuse. Quite an elaborate story you have here. He held the paper close to his face. Whose signature is this? Bonnie glanced at each of the boys, then drooped her head before answering in a soft voice, My foster mother's. Did she write this story? No, I wrote it, but she read it and signed it. Dr. Whittier lowered his voice as well. The part about the brave drugstore clerk who walked 6 blocks to bring you Pepto-Bismol was very interesting, and I'm sure the neighbor's dog made quite a mess when he pulled the dead raccoon through the kitchen. I'm sorry you had to clean it up yourself, even though you only had a box of tissues and a bar of deodorant soap. He let out a sigh and tapped his finger on the note. But your story doesn't mention whether or not you saw a doctor. Her head sank an inch or two lower. I didn't see a doctor. It was just a bug. It only lasted a couple days. Dr. Whittier scrawled the signature across the note and handed it back to her. You're new here, Bonnie, so I signed it this time. Our policy is that a student must bring a doctor's note for illnesses, absences of more than 1 day. Thank you, Dr. Whittier. I understand. Bonnie picked up the note and slid it into her pocket. Let me see. Then nodded towards the desk. Oh, Adam's lighter. Dr. Whittier's eyes narrowed. He glared at Adam while raising the lighter to Bonnie's eye level. Are you saying that you recognize this lighter, Miss Silver? Sure, she shrugged. Adam likes to show it off to the girls. He says the snake emblem is really cool. Dr. Whittier mentioned for Bonnie to leave. As she walked out, she looked back at and smiled at Billy. He offered a weak but thankful smile in return. The principal shook his head. Adam. Why did you even try to pull this one? He opened the drawer and drew out a file. I should have known the lighter was yours. You've been caught smoking in the boys' room 4 times, and Billy has no record at all. Adam spread out his hands. But I quit, honest I did. I gave the lighter to Billy when I kicked the habit. But you'd never seen the lighter before? Billy grinned. Dr. Whittier had Adam on the hook, time to reel him in. While Dr. Whittier lectured on the evils of smoking, lying, and bearing false witness against a neighbor, Billy glanced into the contraband drawer. Inside lay a large pocket knife, several packs of cigarettes, and a can of beer. Could all of those be Adam's? When the lecture ended, Dr. Whittier pulled 2 forms from a lower drawer. The sheets held dozens of blank lines and empty check boxes. Wielding a sharp pencil, he filled in several spaces, printing names and violations in block letters. Billy cleared his throat. Does this mean I can go? Now that you know it wasn't my lighter, I can just... No. The principal pointed the pencil toward Billy. You were caught on the stool, whether it was your lighter or not. I'm suspending you both for 3 days. Dr. Whittier called the hall monitor, who escorted both students to their respective classes to get their books and backpacks. When they returned, he ushered into a detention area adjacent to the office, giving them each a towel. If we're unable to contact your parents, we'll keep you here until school gets out. After Dr. Whittier shut the door, Billy dried his face and glared at Adam, who had chosen a desk on the opposite side of the room. Billy sat heavily at a desk and laid his backpack on the floor. After rubbing the towel through his hair and across his arms, he set his hands down on the desk and rested his chin on top. How long would he have to sit with Adam? There was no telling what he might say. But Adam never spoke. About a half hour, a middle-aged man with tattooed forearms entered the room with Dr. Whittier. His slender frame reached out about 5'6", and his 3-day beard and dirty jeans made him look like a homeless tramp. A cigarette pack bulged in his shirt pocket, and his blackened hands told of grimy labor in the nearby coal mines. Adam rose from his seat inside, a look of tired resignation on his face. As they walked out, the man set a hand on Adam's back and grasped a handful of Adam's damp shirt, squeezing tightly as they left the room. The towel still in hand, Billy hurried to the door and looked out the window, a square viewing port at eye level. By the time he pressed his nose to the glass, they were gone. When he turned back, a foul odor drifted by. It smelled like the brewery just outside town. Dr. Whittier re-entered the detention room. Curious, Billy? Well, I saw you looking out the window. I've never met Adam's father before. I didn't mean to be nosy. Dr. Whittier took Billy's towel. I'll get you another one if you need it. He folded it neatly and laid it over his arm. We haven't been able to contact your parents, so I'm afraid you're stuck here for a while. He pointed at Billy's backpack. You did get your you did get your books, didn't you? Billy nodded. Uh-huh. Then make yourself comfortable. I left a message on your answering machine. I'll let you know when your parents call back. He exited abruptly and closed the door. Billy peeked through the window again as the principal limped back to his desk and sat in his swivel chair. Billy plopped back down at the detention desk and pulled a textbook out of his backpack. Mom was probably on the office line, maybe rescheduling flights for Dad so he could go to the festival. She often left voicemail catch the calls while she was busy. He finished his history reading assignment, then worked on the chapter's questions. History had always been his favorite subject, so engrossing himself in the lesson helped pass the time. Unfortunately, the assignment wasn't long enough. After continuing counting and recounting the ceiling tiles and flipping his pen in the air and catching it 100 times, he flopped back in his seat and blew a sigh. When would this torture end? Still waiting, Mr. Bannister? Billy jerked his head up. Mr. Hamilton stood only a step away. Oh, yeah, waiting. And reading ahead. I'll be missing 3 days in case you haven't heard. I heard. I'm going to see what I can do to shorten that for you. He stroked his chin and looked down at Billy with a piercing stare. Are you a friend of Adam Lark? Billy widened his eyes. No way. I don't ever hang out with his crowd. Mr. Hamilton nodded. Well, I suspect Mr. Lark wouldn't care about keeping up with his studies, but I thought you might. Would you like the lecture notes? I might have them on my computer. And I will be glad to send them to you in an email post. You can read them at home. Sure. But I can't go home yet. I'm stuck here in the chamber of boredom. Haven't they been able to reach your parents? Billy eyed his teacher's unusual expression. Was he worried about something? His tone definitely carried a hint of concern. No, my mom's probably too busy to answer the phone. I see. Mr. Hamilton looked at his pocket watch, then withdrew a booklet from his jacket, opened it, and peered at one of the pages. I have my planning period free and all of lunch. Would you like a ride home? Well, Billy imagined riding home with his strange history teacher. It couldn't be worse than spending the rest of the afternoon flipping his pen and counting ceiling tiles. Okay, that would be great, thanks. Mr. Hamilton stared at Billy, as if wishing to ask a question, but he just sighed and turned towards the door. I'll see if Dr. Whittier will give his permission. When he walked out, Billy stuffed his books into his backpack and waited. A few minutes later, Mr. Hamilton returned and poked his head into the room, holding a fresh towel. I pulled your address from your file, Mr. Bannister. Let's depart. I'm gonna drink some water. Or tea, I guess. Let's see how much we have queued up here. Okay, quite a bit still. It's 11:45. Okay. Could probably finish up this chapter. Maybe start on the next one. Let's see. Mr. Hamilton unlocked the passenger door of his station wagon and opened it, revealing a seat covered with books of various sizes and ages. "I'm so sorry," Mr. Hamilton said as he walked around the car. "Just throw them in the back." Billy lifted the top book and read the title out loud, West Virginia Natural Resources. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it to the rear seat, then read each title as he went through the stack: A History of Coal Mining, Appalachian Wildlife, Early West Virginia Settlers. After he tossed the last book, he spread his towel over the seat and settled in. Mr. Hamilton glanced at a pile of books, buckled his seatbelt, and cleared his throat. One must learn about one's home, mustn't one? He started the engine and revved it. The car jerked forward before stopping abruptly. Billy fastened his own seatbelt, trying to muffle the sound of the metal click. His teacher smiled apologetically for the lurch. Billy responded with a queasy half-grin. He turned towards the road and clutched to the armrest. "So, what do you think of Arthur and his knights?" "Huh?" Billy turned. His teacher looked straight at him, not watching the road. "You read the chapter, did you not?" Billy held his breath and pleaded silently. "Please, please, look at the road." "Well," Mr. Hamilton said, turning forward. Billy exhaled. I didn't see what I expected." "Why's that?" "It has the traditional legends and much of the current data speculating on the actual history involved. I was hoping to read about Merlin. I like stories about wizards." The two right tires slid off onto the pebbly shoulder, grinding and popping the gravel beneath. Billy clutched the door handle, but it took only a second for Mr. Hamilton to steer the car back to the pavement. How you Americans ever became accustomed to driving on the wrong side of the road, I'll never know. A moment later, he stopped the car at a railroad crossing. A freight train rumbled by, its wheels squealing under the burden of coal. Now, where was I? Ah, yes, Merlin. Now there's quite a bit of controversy surrounding that chap. And you're right, the book doesn't cover him at all. Billy kept his stare straight ahead. Hopper cars rolled their way across the field of vision, each piled higher than the brim with a mound of ebony grit. What controversy? Oh, opinions from every side. Some historians say he doesn't exist. Some say he was a dark sorcerer, called to do Lucifer's biddings. Others, he was simply a wise counselor to the king, and a few, he was a fiery prophet of Christian faith, working miracles from the Lord. You put all these together, and you get a legend. A mysterious and magical wizard. You would be amazed at how some people still are about these legends. So how can you know what's true and what's not? Research. Lately, a particular interest of mine has been Excalibur, the famous sword. One obscure but reliable source says that if its bearer has faith and a pure heart, Excalibur will make him invincible. You see, according to my source, God bestowed a special power on the sword, such that it responds to the bearer on its own, as though it has a will. Since a sword cannot really have intelligence, it must have a material property that reacts with the holder, a sort of link with someone who emanates holiness. Therefore, the sword's power can be stolen. If an evil man somehow counterfeits purity. The train's wheels screeched, and the car slowed to an agonizing pace. Mr. Hamilton took a deep breath and continued, raising his voice to compete with the noise. Of course, I don't believe there was a lady of the lake to give and take back the sword, so there must be another source of its origin and disappearance. Disappearance? Yes. According to research, the sword really existed. I assume it was stolen, but the perpetrator probably could never use it to its full potential. Thieves don't have pure hearts, as you might imagine. It has been a dream of mine to find the sword and restore it to Arthur's rightful heir. Mr. Hamilton chatted on about Arthur's knights, the real story of the Round Table, and several tales about his hero Sir Gawain. Billy allowed his mind to become absorbed in the lore. Mr. Hamilton's breadth of knowledge was incredible, and the ease with which he talked about God seemed so unreal. Were teachers allowed to talk to students about that? After the last rail car finally made its way across the road, they drove on. Mr. Hamilton launched again into storytelling mode, sounding like one of the old-time radio narrators Billy had heard about from his father, filling the air with oral sound effects and shifting voices from knight to damsel to king. Mr. Hamilton became more like a bard than a teacher. His story song held Billy in a trance, the words transforming into an oracle, even telling of the future, that Arthur would reappear to help his countrymen during their hour of greatest need. Whether that appearance would be in body or spirit, Mr. Hamilton didn't know, but he suspected that the spirit of Arthur would reside in one of his descendants. That person would assume a throne, perhaps a symbolic or a spiritual one, and reinstate Arthurian rule with all its power and moral authority. Just as Mr. Hamilton built the story to a new crescendo, he pulled the station wagon into Billy's driveway and stopped his tale abruptly, reverting to his normal voice. If I'm unable to do anything about your suspension, I will let you know about any new developments in class. Shall I assume that your email address is in your file? It should be. I put it on my form. Very good. You will hear from me soon. Billy looked at his house. His mother might be watching from a window, wondering about the strange car in the driveway. Thanks, Mr. Hamilton. He opened the door, jumped out, and closed it. I'll watch for the email. As the car rattled down the road, the sound raised a reminder of the morning's strange events. Billy searched both ways for the mysterious Cadillac, but there was no sign of it. He looked again at the house. Maybe it would be better to avoid being seen. Why disturb Mom while she's working? Besides, he needed time to decide how to explain why he was home so early. Of course, he eventually needed to tell the truth, but how could he explain the fire sprinklers? Could his breath have really set them off? Was it time to let his parents know his secret? He ran around the house and entered the back door through the kitchen. After checking the floor to make sure he didn't track dirt inside, he headed toward the stairs, but voices from the living room made him pause at the bottom step. He slowed his breathing and turned into the sounds. I waited to tell you, Mom said with a lamenting tone, because I wanted to make sure it wasn't just my imagination. When I saw the welt, I knew our lives would never be the same. You're probably right, Dad replied. I tried to contact Irene. She knew we moved to Castlewood, but there's still no message, not even a peep. Maybe the worst has happened like we feared. His tone grew more agitated. This is why I didn't marry for 1,500 years. I didn't want to put anyone in danger. Billy blinked. 1,500 years? What in the world was he talking about? But when I met you, Dad continued, I knew that, whether I was a dragon or not, you were the person I'd marry. Dragon? Billy stepped closer. This conversation was getting weirder by the second. Is he in any danger? Mom asked. I'm afraid so. If his breath develops a flame, he could kill himself. He can't possibly know how to control it yet, and he doesn't know how to protect himself. Jared, he has to know. When are you going to tell him? Mom's choked sob lingered in the air, bringing tears to Billy's eyes. They had to be talking about him. After a long pause, Dad finally replied, "As soon as possible. I think he can handle it. He's always acted more mature than most kids, but that's to be expected since he has dragon blood, and he probably already knows something's wrong." "True," Mom said. "His breath is scalding. He must be feeling heat. Unless he's already developed scales inside his mouth. I also don't see how he'll be able to use normal dragon safeguards, being a half-breed, I guess you'd call him. And there are other students to think about. It's definitely too dangerous to let him stay in school much longer. We have to homeschool him. And remember that nosy guy driving around in the Cadillac? If someone's spying on us, he's bound to find out about Billy's breath sooner or later. We might even have to leave town. So when he gets home, what do we say to him?" "Nothing yet. I have to consult the books. But I'll talk to him soon, I promise." After a short pause, footsteps sounded from the living room. Billy sneaked up the stairs into his bedroom, rushed to his dresser mirror, and stared at his reflection. "A dragon?" he asked out loud. "A half-breed dragon?" He looked at his hands and ran a finger along his skin, smooth, no hint of scales. He opened his mouth and surveyed the inside. No scales there either, but the roof of his mouth felt weird again, hardened and insensitive to touch. After backing away from the mirror, he stood in the middle of the room, petrified, afraid even to walk for fear of being heard. "Okay, Billy," he whispered, "get a grip. You're not a dragon. That dream about a night was just a dream." Gandalf walked out from under the bed. Billy knelt and petted him, looking deeply into his attentive eyes. "Do you have any idea what's going on?" "I had a dream about a dragon, but I don't remember much about it. Maybe I'm dreaming now." Talking to the cat and stroking his long, silky fur brought a calming sensation. "It can't be a dream, Gandalf. I know I'm awake. It just sounds like my parents have gone crazy. Is this some kind of bizarre joke?" Billy glanced out his door, having left it open a narrow crack. Nothing was visible but an empty hall and the top of the stairs. "It can't be a joke on me. They don't even know I'm here." He lifted his hand and blew on it softly, drawing it closer and closer until he couldn't stand the heat. Ouch! The sting ran through his body like an electric shock. He shivered the tingles away, picked up Gandalf, and hugged him close. With one arm under this cat's soft body, he continued stroking his furry head, talking though his feline friend understood every word. "It's like seeing your parents pull off masks and finding out they're aliens underneath." Alright, I am going to drink the water. Well, tea. The 11:59. How long is this next? I can read it. Alright, Chapter 4. Bonnie Silver. Bonnie sat at her desk and gazed at the room's empty marker board while waiting for class to begin. The day had been an eventful one. Meeting Billy at the office seemed providential, the right place at the right time. There was something different about him, maybe his eyes. Could he be the one? Something jerked her braid. Ow! She whirled on her seat. Adam glared menacingly at her. "That's for snitching on me, Bonnie Backpack. You're lucky old lady Roberts is coming down the hall, or I'd really let you have it." Bonnie's cheeks flushed hot, and her voice spiked with anger. "And you would have let Billy take the blame for what you did, you coward." She rose from her seat and stood toe-to-toe with Adam, staring with narrowed eyes into his, tilting her head upward to compensate for the difference in height. "I'm not scared of bullies like you. You're the one who's lucky the teacher's coming." A round of oohs filtered from the classroom as every eye looked to the two combatants. Bonnie knew Adam would never back down in front of an audience. She had to hold her ground. Without flinching, she maintained her fiery glare. "I heard you got suspended. What are you doing here anyway?" Adam pulled back a bit. "I told Whittier I forgot my English book, so he let me come back. But I really came to settle a score with you, you little snitch." With a quick reach, he grabbed Bonnie's backpack and used it to spin her around. "I've always wanted to see what you keep in that precious backpack of yours. I'll bet you're hiding some weird deformity, probably a big lump with gross oozing sores." Bonnie twisted, trying to get away. "Let me go, you creep." "Ah, here's a zipper." When Adam began unzipping the pack, Bonnie spun like a spring-loaded catapult and landed a crushing fist against his cheek, sending him flying backwards onto the desk behind him. He rolled off and flopped face down on the floor, sprawled and whining. The class interrupted in whoops of laughter and cheers. A nails on chalkboard screeched, "Bonnie Silver, what's the meaning of this?" The students became silent statues. Bonnie turned slowly. Mrs. Rogers glared at her, full jowls pushing downward in a bulldog frown. Bonnie's cheeks heated again, probably crimson by now. "Mrs. Roberts, I'll deal with you in a minute." She bustled to Adam and knelt at his side. "Are you all right?" Adam held his cheek and moaned. "Dr. Whittier said I could get my English book, Mrs. Roberts, but Bonnie slugged me for ratting on her boyfriend." He looked up at her and with sad eyes. "I guess I deserved it, didn't I?" "Of course not." She glared at Bonnie. "I can't believe you punched him. How could you?" Without waiting for an answer, she crooned softly to the fallen bully. "Adam, dear, do you want me to call the nurse?" Bonnie caught a glimpse of Adam's evil smirk. Unable to stand the injustice for another second, she stomped out of the classroom in a huff. "Report to the principal's office, young lady," Mrs. Roberts called after her. "I'll be there in a few minutes." Bonnie slapped the door behind her and stood in the hall, with her arms straight down, her fists tight as she growled, That Adam Lark, he's always getting people into trouble." She stalked down the hall, her teeth clenched. After anger surged, why resist it? After all, it was Adam who started the fight. First, he got Billy in trouble. Then he almost found out what was in her backpack. If that secret ever got out, I would just die. Lost in her thoughts, she nearly passed the principal's door, but halted in time to take a sharp turn into the office. Once in the anteroom, she looked around. The last time she was here, only a few hours ago, the office seemed bright and cheery. Now it took on a different air, dark and quiet. The dismal threshold that led to the torture chamber. Devices on the wall attested to a sadistic maniac within. And what about the pictures? She had noticed them before, but now they seemed to come alive. Paintings from long ago, gothic and fearsome. Shadowy knights and reddish-brown fire-breathing dragons in mortal combat. The knights clad in chainmail, wielding shining broadswords, and some bore horrible wounds, open and dripping red. Some of the dragons had only 2 legs, some 4, but all displayed magnificent wings that seemed to beat furiously in battle. Bonnie drew closer to one painting and focused on the dragon's beautiful wings, supported by a large sinew that resembled a wiry arm. Each taut canopy boasted a network of rib-like struts. No wonder they held such fierce power. This dragon had a tawny beige hue and deep penetrating eyes. Entranced, Bonnie raised a hand to touch the image. Miss Silver? Bonnie spun. Mr. Whittier stood at his office door, staring at her with one eye half closed, a hand rubbing his chin. Why are you back? Did you forget something? No, I was just... Her throat tightened. Something about Dr. Whittier's face raised a paralyzing fear, something oddly familiar, like a phantom in a fleeting nightmare. Dr. Whittier stepped forward, looking past Bonnie at the wall. Were you admiring the painting? Yes. The dragon is awesome. He frowned. You like the dragon? Yes. He's a magnificent creature. He glanced at Bonnie before turning to the painting again. She was a formidable one, to be sure. She? Never mind. Now, what can I do for you? Mrs. Roberts marched into the office, shaking her finger at Bonnie. That girl, she spat angrily. That girl knocked down another student with her fist. She gave a roundhouse swing with her own fist, wrapping her arm around her ample waist in a follow-through. Just like that. She gasped for breath, before stopping and staring at Dr. Whittier. Dr. Whittier turned toward Bonnie, a hint of a smile breaking through. Is that so? After briefly scanning Bonnie, he turned back to Mrs. Roberts. Whom did she hit? Adam Lark. She knocked him flat. Dr. Whittier's brow lifted. Adam? I told him he could come back for a book, but I thought he'd have done that long ago. He's a good boy. I'm sure he was waiting for me to give him his homework assignment. Dr. Whittier rolled his eyes. I'm sure. He cast a doubtful stare at the teacher and gestured toward the chair. Why don't you have a seat, Mrs. Roberts? She glanced at the chair before resuming her fiery demeanor, her nose slightly lifted. I prefer to stand. Dr. Whittier nodded. Adam's a head taller than Bonnie, isn't he? At least, Mrs. Roberts said. But she's vicious. She went just like this. Mrs. Roberts twisted, drawing her fist back for another punch, but Dr. Whittier caught her wrist before she could demonstrate again. I have the idea, Mrs. Roberts, he said, releasing her arm. Don't worry, I'll take care of this matter. Please send Adam to me. He scowled at Bonnie, then added a quick wink. Only Bonnie could see. On her way to the door, as Mrs. Roberts passed Bonnie, she leaned close and whispered, Trailer trash ruffian. It's no wonder you don't have any friends. Bonnie suppressed a cringe. The words burned like acid. Trailer trash? She didn't live in a trailer, but she knew what the insult meant. She was an orphan girl from the wrong side of town. Tears welled. She fought hard to quell them, but one managed to trickle down her cheek. Dr. Whittier mentioned for Bonnie to follow him out the anteroom and into his office. When the door closed, he drew a tissue from a box and handed it to her. She took it gratefully and wiped her eyes. A big smile grew on the principal's face. You decked Adam Lark? He laughed out loud. He probably stayed to harass you for identifying the lighter, but then he interrupted himself with another laugh. Bonnie shrugged, unable to smile. He was trying to make her feel better, which was nice, but Mrs. Roberts' echoing words drowned any joy that tried to surface. Dr. Whittier sat in his desk chair, gave it a spin, and laughed as he rotated. When he faced her again, he leaned forward and folded his hands on the blotter. That boy has needed a good hard licking for a long time. I'll bet he deserved it, didn't he? Finally letting a smile break through, she nodded. Tell me, what did he do this time? Well, Bonnie hesitated, wondering how much she could reveal. It's okay, I've heard it all. Go ahead and tell me. He tried to open my backpack. Dr. Whittier eyed the backpack. Why did he do that? He wanted to see what was inside it, I guess. Maybe he's overly inquisitive. The principal's brow wrinkled. He clenched his hand into a fist. So you decked him for trying to get a look at your books? Not knowing how to answer, Bonnie just bit her lip and stayed quiet. Dr. Whittier's expression tightened, almost as if He had suspicious X-ray eyes that penetrated the denim pack. Do you have contraband in there? Oh no, Dr. Whittier, it's just that. She lowered her eyes. I think you should tell me, Bonnie. If you have a good reason to keep it secret, I can make sure nobody bothers you again. Bonnie sighed. After only a couple weeks at this school, dozens of kids had asked about her backpack. Why is it so big? Why do you never take it off? Why do you wear it so high on your back? What are you trying to hide? She had always been able to laugh it off before, but now she was in a tight spot. She had to tell the principal the truth. I have a deformity on my back, and if I don't wear the backpack, it's really obvious. And that embarrasses you, Dr. Whittier said. Bonnie averted her gaze and barely breathed her answer. Yes, it does. For a moment, both were silent, Bonnie keeping her head turned, wondering what terrible things Dr. Whittier must be thinking about her. Finally, she looked at him through tear-filled eyes. I know I shouldn't be so vain, but... Oh no, Dr. Whittier said. Don't worry yourself about that. I understand completely. When I was your age, I always wore long-sleeved shirts to cover my ugly birthmark on my arm. He rolled his sleeve up, revealing a large reddish blotch on the underside of his forearm. The mark resembled a misshapen club, the playing card variety, but it had an angry look, more like an old burn than other birthmarks she had seen. That's not so terribly gruesome, she said, trying to offer a tone of sympathy. It's really superficial. Yes, you're right, but to a shy adolescent, it was a disaster. Bonnie had let her head droop as she whispered, Mine's much worse. Don't worry, Bonnie. Your secret is safe with me. I'll discreetly pass the word around to the teachers. They'll be more likely to support you if they know what's going on. She nodded, though. Spreading the news couldn't possibly be a good idea. The thought of revealing her troubles for everyone to gossip about raised a shudder. Dr. Whittier gestured toward the detention room. Why don't you sit in there until this period is over, then go to your next class? Bonnie nodded again and shuffled to the side office, her head tilted downward and her long braid hanging over her chest. The plaited brown braids were not quite as neat as they had been when she tied them that morning, and she felt the same way, drooping, haggard, and dismal. I'm going to drink some more. Man, reading all of this really does make your throat quite a bit drier. As she walked, she sensed Dr. Whittier's stare following her. What was he thinking? She knew her clothes weren't exactly the latest style, but they were clean and modest, so that wasn't why he was staring. When she glanced back, he quickly turned his head. He was watching. When she entered the detention room and closed the door, she peeked out its window. Dr. Whittier walked around his desk and into the file room adjacent to the main office. Several seconds later, he returned with a folder and took it back to his desk. A moment after he sat, Adam Lark sauntered into the room, with his hands in his pockets and his body tilted back slightly. He exuded cockiness. Bonnie opened the door a few inches, allowing the sounds to come through. Mrs. Roberts said you wanted to see me, Adam said. Dr. Whittier held the file on his desk and folded his hands on top. His eyes narrowed and he leaned toward Adam. A purplish bruise had grown on the boy's face, and it swelled like a rodent's cheek pouch. Did you see what was in Bonnie's backpack? Dr. Whittier asked. Adam shook his head nonchalantly. Nah, I just got the zipper open a little before she punched me. All I saw was a leather strap of some kind. Hmm. Leather, you say? Adam blew a large gum bubble and snapped it down between his teeth. Yeah. Can I go now? You got the goods on Bonnie, and I should let her should be getting home to do my assignments. Dr. Whittier breathed a deep sigh. Yes, I know. I've seen your grades. He shooed Adam away with a wave of his hand. Don't come back until your suspension's over. Sure thing, Doc. Adam turned and strutted out the office. Dr. Whittier shook his head and flipped open the file. He picked up a photo-size card and studied it before putting it down, thumbing through the folder's stack of papers. Bonnie eyed the file. Might it be hers? What was he looking for? He already knew she lived in a foster home, but what else could be in that folder? He underlined something on the page and picked up the phone, alternately punching buttons and looking back at the sheet. After a few taps of his pencil on the desk, spoke into the phone. Yes, this is Dr. Whittier, principal of Castlewood Middle School. I'm looking for information on a girl who's in your foster system. Bonnie Silver. Right. And where did she come from? Yes, I understand. I'll come by and show you my credentials. Thank you. Goodbye. Bonnie swallowed hard. It was her folder. He was investigating her. Dr. Whittier hung up his phone and shuffled the file pages together. When he rose from his seat, Bonnie let the door close gently, hustled over to a desk, and sat. She leaned forward to make room for her backpack and gazed straight ahead. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Dr. Whittier peering at her through the window. Ring! Bonnie flinched as a class change bell. She glanced out the window. Dr. Whittier was no longer watching. When she left the detention room, she found him sitting at his desk. So, she said, attempting a hopeful expression, "Can I go now?" Dr. Whittier folded his hands over the file folder. Yes, of course. Bonnie exited the office and walking down the hall, but the sound of the door opening again made her turn. Dr. Whittier was leaving, a file tucked securely under his arm as he hobbled in the opposite direction. A chill ran along her skin. Her deformity had finally been revealed. Was that good or bad? She had hidden the truth for so long. Maybe it wouldn't be awful if a white knight rode on his steed, shining the light of truth on her secret, ready to protect her at all costs. But what if it was the wrong person found out? A dark knight who would expose her to everyone. There were too many mysteries, too many unprotected clues, and Dr. Whittier seemed like a man on a mission. Yet, was he on her side, on the side of light, or the side of darkness?